A brief introduction to the short stories Rain and Snow. Rain and Snow were originally part of a whole novella that I was working on, the idea of which would be like the X-Men superhero story set during the time of the Civil War, an alternate reality where an exploding comet leaving energy particles to rain down into the atmosphere of Earth caused people to begin to develop mutations and superhuman abilities. Skuld, the snowman, was the first. He was an attempt of mine to come up with a tragic superhero that hadn't been used before. And so his abilities, or rather his form, is ill-defined. No facial features, pale, white like the snow, somehow able to see, speak through these very subtle features on his face. And he discovers by the death of his mother and his attempted mournful suicide that he can't seem to die. What he would find out later in the story was that he was feeding sustenance directly from the snow, the way a fish might filter oxygen and nutrients out of water with its gills. I didn't get that far in the story. It isn't that he's immortal, but it's that the snow sustains him. And the snow obeys his commands, and we would have discovered later that water could be converted by him into snow. There were several other characters that I had briefly written, but since deleted. There was a female conjoined twins who shared, well, two faces on a single head and was named Duet. Duet also somehow shared a brain in a fashion that allowed her brain to be almost twice the size of an ordinary human's. And so Duet, who was 1 and 2 at the same time, had this phenomenal brain power and was a genius. Billy Bear, who was a half white, half Native American, and who by contact with the rain, the energy rain of the comet, his spirit animal, being a bear, came to life as a sort of psychic force field. There was Fish, a boy in the South, in the Confederacy in the story, who was able to expand the size of his body like many sea creatures. Also Sweat, who was a freed slave whose glands were able to produce a highly corrosive and acidic composition at will and in large quantities. And in time, the combination of his abilities with Snow's ended up on the battlefield. Now, the reason I ended up not going through with the story, which I call them chimeras, by the way, a chimera, I never followed through on it or have since deleted most of it because of the things that have happened over the last, it's been almost 10 years since I had started writing the story off and on. The things that have happened in the world with critical race theory and other communist atrocities to human thought, it kind of became, it isn't that I was at all concerned. I don't care if radical extremists are mad by what I write, but we've reached a point in our culture, anti-culture, where I didn't want to seem like I was pandering to those things. So on the one hand, me being mostly white, but not all, and writing African freed slave or Native American half-breed characters would be offensive to those people. I don't care about that. But we've reached a point now where the critical theory has ruined everything. I mean, it's ruined the superhero movies, science fiction, Star Trek, Star Wars. Like, now everything is so blatantly just, all we did was try to check the boxes. We didn't even try to write a decent story. We got to check all the boxes. And when I went back and looked at some of my own writing that had too much of that in there, including my other novel, The Harvest of Marshmallows, I truncated them. The Harvest of Marshmallows novella is now a few disjointed short stories. I deleted all of the things that I realized that to release them now makes it look like I'm pandering to that way of thinking, which I would certainly never do. So the novel of the Chimeras, my X-Men of the Civil War era, will not come to fruition unless I think of other ways to write the characters in short stories. But I had recorded Rain, the introduction to the story, and then the first short story, Snow, recorded them here for posterity because I kind of enjoyed them, and those were ones I wanted to preserve. Out Minnesota Way. It was a cool northern winter's night when the strange light appeared. Across the crisp, clear stars of the sky it streaked along. Unhindered by the friction of the atmosphere, it nevertheless shuddered and suddenly burst silently into a myriad of sparkling pieces. The last ashen crosses imposed and the closing hymn reached its finale. Pastor Friedrich Kolta swung open the doors at the rear of the sanctuary and prepared to send off his flock with blessings for Ash Wednesday. Of course, it was young Helga who shook his hand first. She always sat in the front row, and as such, she was always the first to be released by the ushers. "Oh my, Pastor," she exclaimed, looking out the doors of the church. "What is that?" Pastor Kolta turned to take in the night sky outside and saw the falling lights dancing like flower petals in a light breeze. "I don't know," he stammered. "I've never seen anything like that." The ushers abandoned their organized dismissals, and all the members of the parish unceremoniously clustered outside to see the lights. Like some strange, mystic rain from heaven, the lit particles danced and twirled and floated featherly to earth. No one knew what to make of the astral sign. Something strange had happened, though. That was most certainly true. In Minnesota Territory, Skuld wept. He didn't make tears, of course. No one had ever determined how the badly deformed boy could see at all through that one roughly eye-shaped bump on his bony face. Somehow he could see, but he couldn't make tears. He ran his bony, pale white fingers across his pale white face. He snorted through the tiny slit that passed for nostrils and wept horrible hissing sounds through his tiny slit mouth. "Mother, Mama," he whispered. Mama didn't answer. She had been Skuld's sole companion his entire life. He was the son of a man who refused to be his father. With one look at Skuld, the coward had run off. He was the son of a nearby village where he couldn't show his face. He was a creature of this snow-laden forest, away from humankind. Only his mother had loved him. Only his mother would look on him. He cried out for her now to the heavens. He had heard the avalanche but been too far away to help. He cleared away the snow, but it was far too late for her crushed form. Now here she lay. Her dead bosom had been to Skuld like the ark of God, bearing the only love and acceptance he had ever known. Skuld dropped into the snow and held her lifeless body. "I love you." He lay there. He lay there. He determined to freeze to death and go with her to the afterlife. But the days went by, and the days turned into weeks. Was he asleep? Was he awake? Was he alive? Why couldn't he die? Months went by. He didn't eat, he didn't drink, he just lay there holding his dead mother even as the winter snows covered them up. Somehow, Skuld couldn't die. Then one day, he heard a commotion above in the snow. It was people from the village. Skuld was suddenly angered by their intrusion. He'd been holding his mother until he was holding her bones. They had been relegated to this remote spot apart. How dare people come out here and play in my snow? How dare they dance on the grave that I deigned to share with my mother? I will confront them, Skold decided. I will give them what they deserve. The snow beneath and beside him began to tremble as if obeying his command. Then it swirled and funneled. Like suddenly in a whirlpool in a great ocean, it lifted, and Skold rose to the surface. My God, he thought, it is at my command. It was responding to me, the snow. Atop a whirlwind of snow, Skold burst forth to the surface and shrieked a hissing howl. As snow particles danced through the air around him, he screamed, "Go away!" The startled villagers fell backward at the commotion. Some screamed, some wept. "Get off my mountain," Skold demanded. They began to cluster together, and they sort of backed away as a group, fearful, but they didn't run off as he'd expected. "What's wrong with you?" Skold demanded. "I said go away." A gray-haired man in a white collar stepped forward. "No." Skold was stunned. "I don't care what you are," the pastor insisted. "We're not going away until we find Sarah." The villagers were whispering among themselves. "It's a demon. It's the devil himself." Yet even as they speculated, the pastor stared down Skold until a hint of recognition entered his eyes. "You are Helga's boy." Skold's tall shoulders slouched. "You knew Mama? You're Skold." He wept a little bit at hearing someone say his name. "I'm Friedrich Kolta," the gray-haired man explained. "I baptized you." "But we never go to the village," Skold insisted. "That was a long time ago." The pastor was speechless. I'm sorry. Everything has gone so wrong, and you never should have been relegated to being out here alone, and I don't know what to do now. We didn't mean to intrude on you and your mother." "Mother is dead," Skold interjected. He had no idea what to say, and there wasn't time. "We came here looking for little Sarah. She was playing in the snow nearby. She fell into some sort of sinkhole. The other children led us up here. Please, just let us look for her." Skold looked over the villagers and immediately spotted the mother of little Sarah because she was the one weeping. It had to be Sarah's mother. Skold knew that look. "Please," the woman gestured with her lips. "Please." They didn't know Skold. They didn't know what he had only begun to discover about himself. Skold closed his eyes, and he tried to feel the snow again, as he had moments before. And it worked. Good God, it worked. "I can feel the snow," he said out loud, "and I can feel there she is." With a dramatic wave of his long, pale arm, another whirlpool emerged in the snow about 100 yards away. They could see a little girl drifting slowly up to safety. "Sarah!" the mother exclaimed as she ran clumsily through the drifts towards her child. The little girl was crying, but all right. Skold dropped his head and began to sink away into his white home. But he stopped, chest deep, to acknowledge a man who ran towards him. "You saved my daughter," the man exclaimed with misty eyes. "Please don't just go away again." "Where should I go?" Skold flatly said. As days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, Skold began to change. Reluctantly at first, he had accepted the hospitality of the village. Now he went there often, careening through the snow with his newfound power. He played with the local children, making up for the childhood he never had, perhaps. In the evenings, he would sit comfortably in the snowdrift just outside the window of their shack and join Sarah and her family for dinner. Pastor Kolta gave Helga a proper Lutheran burial and interred her in the cemetery just outside the church. On Sundays, he would join Sarah and her family and Skold for dinner and conversation. And at night, Skold would lay on his back and command the snow to massage him to sleep, even as it gently moved him around his happy mountain. Eventually, Skold could pray and thank God for the mysterious blessings of his tragic life. In the distance, he heard the church choir singing, "Salvation unto us has come."